I told the Senate in Canada, when Canada passed Bill C-16, which was the pronoun law that every idiot country in the world seems to be jumping on now and passing, that the consequence of confusing people about the difference between men and women would be the production of a psychogenic epidemic. I think there's psychological reason for assuming that the distinction between male and female is the most basic cognitive category. It's the deepest cognitive category. It's the most profound, might be the most sacred in that sense. And that if you throw uncertainty into that, you imagine that there's a hierarchy of psychological instability. And there are people who are barely clinging to the edge. And there's lots of them, just like they cling economically. And there is some unbelievable narcissism and self-aggrandizement in that proposition that you can define your identity subjectively by whim at any moment, and that everyone else has to abide by that as if it's incontrovertible fact.
Well, first of all, you get to shift who you are. And that's that whole process of your definition at 3 may be different than your definition at 5, which may be different than your definition at 7. But we're supposed to take you seriously at this instant if that's who you have defined yourself as this evening or today. Secondly, I think it is at the heart of the 10 Commandments that you shall have no other God before me. And what we've now said is, oh no, you are your own God. You are therefore by definition in front of God, because you get to redefine whatever you want to redefine. Well, once you get into that kind of relativism, you have everything begin to disintegrate because there is no framework of reference you can cling to it.
Yeah, well, it seems to have something to do with this disintegration of the intermediary hierarchy. So one of the things Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, said back near the end of the Second World War was that, well, he said 2 things that were quite striking. One was that the biggest threat that was going to confront us in the future would be something like mass psychological instability rather than, let's say, material want and privation per se. And he also pointed out that the logical conclusion of the Protestant Revolution would be that everyone would become their own church. Right? That was the degenerative tendency because of the destruction of intermediary hierarchical systems. One of the things conservatives can offer, and I think this works out well on the front of sanity itself, a front of bolstering sanity, is there is a concept among humanistic psychologists in particular that the atomized self is the center of the world, and that self-actualization is the essence of sanity. But there's a more sophisticated version of that, I would say, stemming mostly from Piagetian thought, that there isn't any difference between sanity and proper nesting inside a hierarchical community. So you can imagine that, well, if your marriage is really unhappy, you're not going to be very sane. And if your children are miserable and misbehaving and your marriage is unhappy, you're even going to be less sane. And that will also be true if your friends have turned against you and you have no position in the community with regard to a job or a career. So it's better to conceptualize identity and sanity as the consequence of proper nesting in a hierarchical social structure, so that you're sane if you have a marital partner who provides you with corrective feedback. The 2 of you have a good marriage and are sane if you are together jointly, back to back, in relationship to your children, who are then stabilized because of your stability. Now you're nested inside a stable family. You can walk outside of that family into the community, and you can orient yourself properly in relationship to a job or career. And that also provides you with corrective feedback from all your compatriots and your peers. And that scales politically at the level of the city and the state and the country. And so sanity and identity then becomes the entire hierarchy of hierarchical relationships. And that's another thing that conservatives can offer as a vision, as an antidote to this atomized liberalism that results in the final analysis in self-aggrandizement to the point of claiming divine attributes. That's how it looks to me, anyways.
Well, I think at times you are probably a deeper thinker than I am. I'm only a politician.
Now, it isn't obvious to me that there are visionaries working effectively on the conservative front, the Republican front in the US. And so what do you see as the way forward for the Republican Party if it got its act together, let's say, and developed something approximating a vision? And do you see any sources of that vision emerging?
Yeah, look, I think there are a lot of entrepreneurial personalities who are each developing different approaches on different topics, different solutions. And I think what you'll see is both in the House and Senate and among governorships, we have a number of governors who are actually solving problems and developing a general sense of a productive system. But I mean, part of the challenge is, I think if you're a conservative, you're trying to create a frame of reference or a framework within which people are able to improve their own lives. So we're not trying to set up the government which then decides for you what your vision is. We're trying to set up a system or structure in which you get to pursue the vision you believe in. And we believe that kind of freedom is in fact really, really important. And I think it's interesting, you know, I think Lincoln in that sense may have been the greatest visionary of American conservatives, because when he described government of the people, by the people, and for the people, he's really describing a very open-ended concept. He's not describing any one specific thing. He's describing freedom. He really believed that people had the right to pursue happiness as explained in our Declaration of Independence. He had done it in his own life, had come out of relatively real poverty and risen by his own efforts and his own studies. And I think he thought that the job of government was to create a framework within which people would go and work. Lincoln would be appalled at today's massive number of people living in dependency. So I think the vision that we have to offer is one that says, you know, we want everybody to have an opportunity to get a good education, but, and that's a good example. Betsy DeVos, the former Secretary of Education under Trump, has come up with this idea of education freedom, that it's not just school choice, but it's also homeschooling, it's also apprenticeship, it's also online learning, that there are many, many different ways that people can learn, and that it's not just a 19th century bureaucracy,